My name is Elena Cross, and this is not a story I ever wanted to tell, but silence has its own weight, and tonight I cannot carry it anymore. I have always believed that vengeance does not begin with violence, it begins with thought, and thought sharpens into strategy until it becomes sharper than any blade. People expect revenge to be loud, bloody, and dramatic, but the truth is it often walks in silence, hidden in gestures and words that slip like shadows across a room. I learned this truth when I lost everything, though I will not tell you what was taken, because the absence is more haunting when left unnamed. Perhaps it was family, perhaps it was love, perhaps it was my own dignity. But what matters is that a hand reached from the darkness and pulled something vital away from me, and in the void that followed I did not break, I calculated. That was the beginning of the game, though my opponent never realized the rules were being rewritten. The city was a maze of glass towers and alleys that smelled of rain-soaked secrets, and I became a ghost in its veins, watching, listening, recording. He thought he was untouchable, that his name was armor and his wealth was a fortress, but arrogance is the easiest lock to pick. I never confronted him outright because confrontation gives away power. Instead, I smiled when he passed me by, I nodded in polite silence during conversations, I played invisible, and while he believed I was fading into insignificance, I was planting seeds. The beauty of mind games is that you never strike first, you let the enemy unravel themselves, and you only whisper the lies they already believe. Each week I fed him fragments of misinformation, introduced doubts into his alliances, and arranged encounters where trust seemed certain but always tilted just enough to leave him questioning. I never needed him to suspect me, I only needed him to suspect everyone else. Paranoia is a poison that tastes like truth, and once it enters a man's mind, it becomes his only compass. There were nights when I wondered if I had become more shadow than flesh, because my life narrowed into patterns of surveillance and silence. I memorized the rhythm of his footsteps, the cadence of his voice when he lied, the pause in his breath when he doubted himself. I was no longer Elena, I was every reflection in a window he passed, every stranger's glance that lingered just a little too long, every unanswered phone call at midnight. I wanted him to feel what I felt, the gnawing uncertainty that eats you alive in the quiet, the suspicion that every smile hides a knife. Sometimes I watched from across crowded rooms, unseen, and when his eyes darted around, restless, I knew the game was working. He had built his empire on the illusion of control, and I was stripping it away grain by grain, until his certainty turned to sand slipping through his fingers. Revenge is not a straight line, it is a labyrinth, and the trick is not to lead your prey but to make them lead themselves into the center where there is no escape. I orchestrated small failures, financial discrepancies that could not be traced but always pointed to betrayal, whispers in corridors that carried just far enough for him to catch but not enough to confirm. Each misstep he took was his own, and I simply adjusted the mirrors so he would see enemies where there were none. It is a slow death, being devoured by your own suspicions, and the cruelest part is that he asked for my help. Confided in me, even never realizing that the sympathetic ear he leaned on was the architect of his ruin. I smiled as he unraveled, because vengeance tastes sweetest when your hands appear clean. Still, the more deeply I wove the game, the more I wondered who I was becoming. I had set out to punish a man, but somewhere along the way the punishment became my only reason to breathe. I stopped sleeping in any real sense, because dreams were wasted hours, and I could not risk missing a detail. My reflection became unfamiliar, not because I looked different but because I looked like someone who no longer cared about the line between justice and obsession. I suppose that is the price of revenge, you do not walk away from it unchanged, you trade pieces of yourself to feed the fire. Sometimes, in the rare moments of honesty I allowed myself, I wondered if I was truly avenging the past, or if I was simply feeding a hunger that had no end. But doubts were luxuries, and luxuries had been stolen from me long ago. The night everything reached its crescendo was storm-slick and heavy with electricity, and I watched from a distance as he stumbled through his own downfall. Deals collapsed, allies abandoned him, trust eroded until even his closest shadows deserted him. He tried to hold his ground, but suspicion had already eaten the foundation away, and a man cannot stand on air. I will not describe the exact moment when his empire cracked, because you do not need to see rubble to understand that the walls are gone. What matters is that he was alone, utterly and finally alone, and in that solitude, I knew he had felt the same hollow emptiness that had once consumed me. I should have felt triumph, but what I felt instead was silence, as if the victory had been swallowed before I could taste it. Some will tell you revenge offers closure, but closure is a lie. The game ended, yet I kept listening for his footsteps, kept watching for his shadow. Perhaps the cruelest twist of all is that once you dedicate yourself to unraveling someone else, you forget how to exist without the unraveling. People around me still spoke my name, but Elena Cross was a mask, nothing more, and underneath it was something quieter, something sharper, something unmoored. I told myself I had won, but the truth was that the game had changed me as much as it had destroyed him. And I no longer knew if I was predator, prey, or just another ghost lost in the maze. Now you may wonder if I am confessing to guilt, or if I am boasting of victory. I cannot answer that. The words I speak are fragments, and perhaps they are lies, perhaps they are truths, perhaps they are both at once. I have given you enough to imagine the rest, to picture him broken, to picture me standing over the wreckage, or perhaps walking away with nothing at all. The ending is not for me to decide, it is for you to carry. Do you believe I triumphed, or do you believe I was swallowed by the very shadows I created? That is the puzzle I leave with you, because revenge is never about the ending, it is about the game, and once the game has begun, there are no real winners. So listen closely, because this is the last thing I will say. My name is Elena Cross. I played the game. I won. Or maybe I lost. And now, as you hear my voice, perhaps you should ask yourself a question you do not want the answer to. What if you are not the listener at all? What if you are the next player?